Welcome to Manager Tools. Today's cast, the High D Manager Simple Downfall. Here we go. All right, folks, here we are. We're going to talk about high Ds. If you've been following us so far, you know that we've talked about the high C's, the high S's, the high I's, and we're finally getting to high D's. High D's like bottom line up front, and they want you to get right to things. So we're going to get right into it. So Mark, what are we going to talk about today for high D's?
Yeah, we've got 4 points in the agenda. So high D's, it won't take that long. We're going to give you a little bit more detail on the agenda here. So for those of you high D's who only want to listen for 3 minutes, we'll hit you right in the nose, and then you can go back to work. The first point is actually a reminder or an introductory point, which is don't assume your boss is a high D. I'm going to come back to that one. We'll talk about that one last, okay? Number 2, don't kill the goose for its golden eggs. Get to know your team. The fundamental problem with high D managers is they tend to put results in front of relationships. They always slight relationships in order to get more results. If they have a choice between results and relationships, they choose results over and over and over again. And as we said before, as we said over and over and over again on Manager Tools, it takes both results and relationships. Early in your career, it can be all results. You don't really need relationships. Later in your career, it's almost all relationships. You still have to have results, but relationships become increasingly more important because you have less ability to get things done directly. You have to get it done through other people. The first fundamental mistake that high D managers make is that they drive people to succeed and burn them out. And they can take a hill, but they can't take the second or third or fourth hill because people don't keep signing up for the kind of big things that the high D wants. So we recommend high D managers, you need to get to know your team. You may scoff at one-on-ones. And we don't care if you do one-on-ones. We want you to know your team. And if you just walk around talking to people about work, you don't know your team well. Spend time in one-on-ones, get to know your team, pay attention to them, learn their strengths and weaknesses so that you can more effectively delegate and you can get the most out of them because they believe that you are interested enough in them that they're willing to give you their best. Okay, so that's don't kill the goose for its golden eggs. Get to know your team. That's our first recommendation. The second one is results don't always trump people. You need to invest in relationships with other people too, not just your team. The show is all about results versus relationships, and D's go too far often in terms of results. As Wendy would say, I know other people are important, but I'm so driven I forget it because Wendy is a high D. Doesn't make you a jerk inherently, although there are a lot of jerks who are high D's, or a lot of high D's who are jerks. But our second recommendation is you need to bolster your interest in relationships with other people besides your team. And what we're talking about is peers and other people in the organization at various other places strategically. Find out who you need to have relationships with. And that generally would include all of your boss's directs, all of your immediate peers, as well as other people throughout the organization, and invest time in relationships with them. And the easiest way to do it is a peer one-on-one where they get 15 minutes and you get 15 minutes. It's only a couple of hours a week we're talking about. And this is a case of if you scale back a little bit, you actually sub-optimize on everything. You end up optimizing everything a lot more effectively. Okay. And then our fourth point, which is actually our third recommendation, is mind your tongue. Truth and relationships don't always mix. High D's get themselves in trouble by being candid when they ought not to be. And we're not talking about calling people idiots. Okay. We're talking about candidly answering a question. Do you care what I think? And the high D says no. Now look, your defense is truth. Unfortunately, that truth just cost you a relationship. You don't have to go to the other extreme and be nothing but a politician the way you might scoff at some high I's. But there's a difference between thinking and saying and doing. And too many high D's think that because they think it, it's therefore true. And if it's true, therefore you can say it. And saying a thing is enormously different than thinking it when it comes to relationships that you have to mine over and over and over again in the world, the connected world today, and certainly in the connected organization. So be careful what you say. It'll come back to bite you. So keep your mouth shut at times. And then the last point we're going to make is actually the first point of the cast, which is don't assume your boss is a high D. Just very briefly, we'll tell you that a lot of people tell us their bosses are high Ds when in fact they're not, because bosses act in dominant ways. And so if we're not really clear about what it means to be a DIS or C, or we don't really know our boss that well, we say, oh, look there, he was short with me. He's a high D. And folks, if you're listening to this and you're not a high D, or you're trying to decide what your boss is, don't jump to the conclusion that he or she is a high D just because they're a boss, because bosses do tend to communicate communicate quickly and shortly with people, but that doesn't inherently make them a high D. You've got to study and gather some data, and you can find out more about that in our disccasts. It's kind of a long index, kind of a long outline, but for you high Ds, there's the key points.
Good. Now, all that assumes that our audience knows what a high D is, and we know that most folks do, but we have many listeners who do not. So real quickly, could you describe what the high D is in the DISC profile?
Yeah, we're using DISC profile information. A high D or a high dominance manager is one who is forceful, assertive, and maybe even at times an aggressive boss. He tackles the big projects. He doesn't spend too much time worrying what people think about him. He makes things happen fast, even if it's a little messy. He's okay with messy, frankly. And he's sometimes a little rough on other people's feelings. A high D boss, she thinks your feelings ought to be left at home. She's at times brusque when she intends to be direct. Yet she always seems to be the one that the tough jobs are given to when something has to get done. Despite some direct frustrations with high D bosses, their ability to achieve results gets them promoted. Frankly, the top of most larger organizations are heavily populated, more than just a normal percentage random distribution, by high Ds. They tend to be comfortable with a little bit of roughness, but that bonus check you get, they would think to themselves, that bonus check you might have gotten is often the result of their willingness to ask for more and get it. They would say you got to break some eggs to make an omelet. That's just a good kind of high overview. They tend to be focused on work and not about people. And if you want to know more, we offer the 28-question, 30-minute DISC profile on our website. Or look, you can get it in a lot of other places too. You don't have to get it from us. Just Google the word DISC or come to Manager Tools, and you can take the test, learn about you, and learn a great deal when you listen to our casts about how to interact with other people based on their behavioral tendencies.
Right. And look at folks, we said in the previous casts, we're not making fun of high Ds here. That's for sure. And there might be some humor as we describe some of the things high Ds do, some of the stupid things, frankly, that high Ds do. But you got to know, we made fun of high Cs. I'm a high C. We made fun of high Is. Mark's a high I.
Yeah,
both
we
agree
did.
what was in there, right? But we're both of us are high Ds. And so, laugh along with us as we joke about ourselves.
Yeah. We're not afraid of being direct, and we're willing to take risks to achieve bigger gains because Mike and I are high Ds. And if you know the history of Manager Tools, you probably assume or surmise that. We've given up lots in personal income to do this, and we're okay with that risk. I've probably shown more of my high D on the air than Mike has. I know that there are those of you who don't like some of the opinions I have because they're strongly asserted. There are some people who don't listen because I've freely shared my opinion, and that freely sharing my opinion is part of what makes me. That's a behavioral tendency of high Ds. My high I part of me regrets it, right? It's sort of like, what, you don't like me? But my high D says, good luck finding any other stuff as good as ours.
Spoken like a true high D.
Yeah, well, look, I don't mind making fun of myself if it helps other people learn.
Right.
If you hear a little bit of Mike, or more so me in this one, although my D is no higher than Mike's, well done, good catch. We're high Ds. We're proud of it, just like you ought to be proud of whoever you are. We know we have our downsides, just like I's and S's and C's do, but we think we bring good stuff to the table as well. And this is all part of diversity. It's behavioral diversity.
Yeah. Ain't diversity grand?
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to get to the actionable stuff here in a minute, but we've got to warn people a little bit. Is an important caveat here. Far too many directs categorize their bosses as high Ds incorrectly. You think they're high D because there's some behaviors associated with bosses that are kind of high D type behaviors.
Yep.
But it would have been a mistake to assume that your boss is a high D without thinking about it a little bit more. Right? And didn't we test that with a group one time? What happened there?
Yeah, you're thinking the same thing I did. We once joked to a group that 80% of the directs think that their boss is a high D, and the group immediately said, "Oh yeah, that's true. How many of you think you're high D?" And about 80% raised their hand. And we had already done the DISC profile, and only about 40% of the group's bosses were high Ds.
Right.
So it's kind of funny. But look, boss behavior is often, by the definition of role power, dominant behavior, right? Bosses know they can get away with being shorter in their communication with their directs. Bosses know they have enough role power to, quote, be brief rather than, quote, be kind, unquote. Bosses are busier than us, so we get less time with them than we want. So we think, sometimes right, sometimes wrong, we think this way, that they are curt with us. Bosses have to, if they want to be effective, give negative feedback. Well, we feel the sting of that feedback, and therefore on a bad day, we think of our boss as callous, and we say, well, you'd have to be a high D, callous, kind of dominant boss to say that, simply because it's hard to hear. And we might well get this kind of feedback, which we would describe as callousness, from a high C or a high S boss if they really cared about us, right? The fact is, bosses have power over us. We know it. They know it. They are dominant in the pecking order. And so our paradigm of them naturally skews toward dominance, which is the reason why high Ds are called high Ds. The D stands for dominance. So look, don't assume your boss is a high D just because he's short and he gives you negative feedback. I don't mean short in height. I mean short with you, and sometimes curt, and sometimes communicates quickly, and sometimes gives you short deadlines and seems to act as if it's a case of mind over matter. I don't mind and you don't matter. Spend some time studying and verify. Ask yourself, might he be or might she be a high I, S, or C before you say, okay, not only I think he's a D, but I've ruled out I, S, and C behaviors as well. That's the way to be sure that your boss is a D, rather than just being lucky because, well, he behaves like a D because he's my boss.
Good. So let's get directly to there are recommendations for the high D manager and what describe some of their problems. And one of them is, don't kill the goose for its golden eggs. Get to know your team a little bit better, right? I mean, that's every time.
Yeah, look, sometimes we make fun of high Ds or Is or S's or C's for that matter. I make fun of you, you make fun of me, right? And we think that's helpful. Sometimes the making fun of high Ds, though, takes a little bit of a negative edge because there's so much today about being respectful and being mindful of other people's point of view and so on. And high Ds tend to score low on the respect for other people scale, if you will. It's really not a question of them lacking respect for others. It's a function of them putting their drive for results ahead of other people. It's not that they dislike other people. It's that they want results more than they want relationships.
Right. If you got to make a choice between results and people, they're going to pick results every time.
Yeah, they burn. They burn for results. Sometimes you see people in a soccer match or a football game or a baseball game or a basketball game. You see them, I want the ball. I want the ball. I want to win. I want to win. Even if somebody else might want the ball as well, they're saying, give me the ball, give me the ball. You know, that high D, when the game is over, immediately says, how could I have done better, right? They don't want to celebrate their teammates. They say, how can I have done better? What's our next opponent? How can we do better? High Ds, we see the top of the mountain. We see that goal we're shooting for, and we want to own it now. We ignore the challenges. I mean, yeah, there are challenges. Hell, it's a mountaintop, right? You have to work to get up it. But frankly, most high Ds can't even be made to think about the challenges, because every moment spent thinking about the challenge is a moment not spent thinking, dreaming, planning, working, slaving, achieving, and owning the goal itself. Why would I focus on a failure or the cause of a failure? Let's focus on the success. Let's picture the success. Let's focus on being at the top. You know, Leo DeRocher, a famous American baseball manager, once said, show me a good loser and I'll show you a loser.
I wonder what he was, right?
That's so clever. Yeah. And look, DeRocher was a high D, right? It's as simple as that. There's a great military story that sums up the high D's zeal for achieving the goal. There was a general standing in the back of a briefing during World War I. A difficult mission was being discussed, and the enemy owned a particularly important hill that dominated the battlefield. The general turned to the officer next to him and said, I'd give 5,000 men to take that hill. Well, there's a captain standing next to them. And if you don't know military ranks, there were going to be many captains in the 5,000 the general would need and no generals, right? And the captain turned to the officer next to him and said, mighty generous, isn't he?
Yeah.
And that general, just like Leo DeRocher, that general was a high D. And some of you are probably puzzled a little bit by that story. For those of you who say, what's the problem with that? You know, the job is to take the hill. If it takes 5,000 men, it takes 5,000 men. And then you ought to look in the mirror and you probably are seeing a high D.
Yeah. Welcome to the club.
Yeah. If you just threw up hearing that story, the idea of losing that many men or people, you're an S. If taking a hill in wartime doesn't sound like too much fun, you're a high I. And if you want to know how you arrived at that 5,000 figure, you're a high C. But here's the simple downfall of this story for you high D generals. After you take that hill, you're going to need those 5,000 soldiers for the next hill. but they won't be there because you used them all up to take the one you're standing on, and you didn't think enough about them. All you thought about was the result you were achieving.
All right. So us high Ds, we've got to get comfortable with husbanding our resources a bit so we can continue to achieve for a long time. It's not enough to take one hill. Only once it takes you 5,000 soldiers. The secret that so few Ds get is that just throttling back 10 or 15%, just a little bit, right, can keep your team with you so that you can take 20, 30, 100 hills, right? Garnering 20, 30, 100 times the accolades and rewards and promotions that you would have otherwise gotten by burning your 5,000 men.
Exactly, right. One of the reasons high Ds are willing to spend those 5,000 men is that they haven't taken the time to get to know them. To most high Ds, their team might be, the teams that report to them might be described as resources that happen to be human rather than as human resources. Ds see us, others around them, as resources first, and the human part of us is, well, let's just say is second or some other part.
Maybe.
Right?
Maybe.
Yeah. But here's the beauty of this. High Ds, you've got to learn this. And if you don't learn it, you're never going to be a great executive. Getting to know your team actually makes you better. How does it make you better? Because when you invest in your team, they're willing to do more for you. They're willing to give you their very best as opposed to what they've been giving you up to now. If you're a high D and you haven't spent time with your folks and you think you're getting their very best, you're wrong. You are not. They're withholding 5 or 10% of their effort because you don't love them, you don't trust them, and they know that you could throw them under the bus in a minute or sacrifice them getting a goal for the benefit of you or for the organization with not a second thought or maybe not a third thought for them. Okay? They withhold their best because they know you don't care about them. Now, look, that may make you angry, right? Why are they withholding their best? I've never withheld my best from anybody. But your anger at them doesn't require them to submit to you. You have to be willing to exchange the fear, which is what they feel now, which gets you 80 to 90% of their best, for trust, which takes investment and which gets you that last 10 to 20% of their best effort. What's more, when you get to know them, you'll know what each one of them is good at. And how is that going to happen? They'll tell you. And then you can assign work to the right person, right? Rather than just the person nearest to you when you happen to think about it.
Yeah, it's the high D is famous for the sink or swim, right?
Yeah.
Here's a job. The job requires X. Joe, I don't know if Joe can do it, and he may or may not be the appropriate person for it. But by God, I'm going to put him in the position, and he's going to sink or swim.
Yeah, and then what they say to us is, well, look, that's how I learned. I learned on my own. Well, high Ds, because they don't pay attention to relationships very much, don't recognize the times that senior people intervene to help them, to mentor them, to coach them, and so on. They just don't see that. They just see it as part of a small blip along the way to a success. Or what ends up happening is they've been trained by bad bosses who haven't gotten to the top of the organization, and they're saying, I was trained that way, so therefore my people should be trained that way. No, what we want is more people capable of getting to the top, not just people who are willing to ignore everybody else to get to the top. And so even if you weren't trained by somebody who cared about you, that doesn't mean that it's not better to train your people, to develop your people by caring about them.
So, okay, so you got to get to know your people. So here's a difficult question. And I'm sorry to throw this at you because I'm sure you really haven't thought much about this. Yeah. So I'm sorry for doing this to you, but just off the top of your head, what do people do in terms of developing relationships? How do they? It's important. High Ds, what do they do?
I'm completely unprepared for that. Can we come back later? Yeah, that's good. Look, one-on-ones is the way to start. And I don't want to be a one-trick pony. I really don't. But when it comes to high Ds, that's the answer. We didn't recommend one-on-ones for high Is. We didn't recommend one-on-ones for high S's. We didn't recommend one-on-ones for high Cs. We recommend them for high Ds. Half an hour, once a week, every week, with each of your team members. Scheduled, not ad hoc. Every week, forever, as long as they work for you. If you need a reason, trust us, you will get more time back in terms of being more efficient and effective than you actually spend in the meeting. This is a true self-licking ice cream cone.
But are you saying if I do one-on-ones with my folks, I do them for this week, one-on-ones, that I'm going to get better results this week? Is that what you're telling me?
This week? If you spend a half an hour this week?
Yeah.
No, absolutely not. But look, we're not talking about spending. We're not talking about buying candy and then eating it. We're talking about an investment, right? Part of the reason there are tax benefits to investing is because the taxing organizations know that you have to spend money and you want to call it an investment and you may not get a return for, 3, 6, 9 months. But most managers will tell us, I noticed within 3 to 4 weeks, less tension, less conflict, and within 2 to 3 months, I noticed better results by
2 to 3
investing
months?
a little bit of time.
I want results now, dude.
Yeah. Okay, well, just work harder then and ignore this cast. I mean, if you want more results now, the thing to do is to work harder. The problem is that's not sustainable, right? You can peak for a day or two, but you can't peak for a month or 6 months or 9 months. If people out there are listening and saying, I've been peaking for the last year, you're kidding yourself, right? You're kidding yourself. You're not peaking.
The extreme would be just, if you want more results now, then just kill the golden goose and get the results and then be prepared to retire next week.
Yeah, exactly. Look, take the last egg that's inside that goose, take it, and you're done. You get it sooner. I mean, you get the benefit. Yeah, you got blood on your hands, but that's okay. You got one more golden egg. Sure. The problem is the source of the golden eggs is gone forever, right? And there are too many high D managers that don't recognize that if you have 10 directs, they do, let's assume they're only 80% as good as you, right? They do 800, let's assume that you do 100% of work and they're 80% times 10. They do 800 bits of work. They do 8 times the amount of work that you do, even if there are 10, even if there are only 10 of them. So a little bit of investment in them gets a lot more value for the entire organization than you trying to get 10% more out of you. One-on-ones are fairly simple. The short answer for now to talk to high Ds so that they can hear it is they get the first 15 minutes, your directs, and they get to talk about whatever they want to talk about. You get the next 15 minutes. Yes, your directs get to come first. Otherwise, the meeting is going to be nothing more than you telling them stuff to do. We recommend you sit down, you shut up, and you listen to your directs and take notes during their 15 minutes. And you're smart. You'll figure it out. You'll learn what's interesting to them, and you'll start being smart in your communications with them. During your 15 minutes, ask them what they're working on. They still work for you. Make them work. You don't have to cry with them or say kumbaya or hold hands. No, you don't do that. Do it because you'll take more. Don't do it because it feels good. Do it because you can take more hills this way. This is not only the goose that laid the golden egg, or, I think it's called production versus production capacity in Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, that if you work harder on production, but you don't invest in production capacity, you're going to burn it out. Well, it's not only P versus PC. It's also sharpening the saw. Your team is your saw. Investing in them and your relationship with them sharpens them and makes them give you more. And we mean it every week, every week, every week. Don't act like you're going to do it for a couple of weeks and then you get busy, right? Don't do that. Say to them, I'm going to do this every single week. They know if you really mean something, you do it. So commit to it and do it. Now look, if after 6 months it's not getting any value, stop. Write us a note and tell us we were wrong, and we'll be happy to listen to you, okay? Nothing is more important than a half an hour with your folks each week, and this comes to you from 2 recovering high Ds. We're actually still high Ds. We've just learned that not everything we do in our natural high D way is effective. There are some things that are ineffective, like telling people how stupid they are, right? The hilltop you're eyeing is not as important as the half hour you're spending investing in the future, right? It doesn't take much, but you get a big return. It's the whole goose laying the golden egg thing, right? Dial back your demands by 5 or 10%, get to know your people a little bit better, and they're going to give you back that 10% and more every single project ad infinitum, okay? Wait a bit for them to lay the next egg, enjoy the egg, and then rejoice when another egg is still coming because you haven't killed them. Your team does more in total than you can do alone, and the more you invest in them, to a degree, the more you can get out of them. It may have been a direct of a high D boss who once said, you may be better than me, but you're not better than we. Okay? Let me make it simple. Wouldn't you rather be CEO with a bunch of people willing to take the next hill for you, rather than a mid-level manager that nobody wants to work for. The difference between the successful executive, high D, and the mid-level manager, high D, who will never go any higher, is that the executive said, I got to invest some time in relationships because I count on other people to get work done for me. I'm going to go ahead and open myself up to 10 to 20% of my time spent on relationships. Not as much as the IRS, who spends the high I or the high S, who spends 50% of their time on relationships, just 10 to 20%. Just open yourself up to it. Invest in it a little bit in an area you're weak and get all kinds of returns from it.
Right. Yeah. It's not like really, really complicated, right? We're not asking you necessarily to love them. We know that's too hard. We never ask you to do it. You just got to stop acting like you hate them. As you know, your friend Marshall Goldsmith taught us, you don't have to go from being a jerk to being a prince overnight. You just need to stop being a jerk for now. And if you're high D, it's as simple as sitting down, shutting up, and listening to your folks. After 6 to 8 weeks of you proving that you're really going to do it for a while, they'll start giving more and sharing more. Simple as that. Yep.
Very, very good. Well said.
Good. So let's talk about our next point. Results don't always trump people. Invest in relationship with others. Well, it's not hard to believe we'd say that after what we just
said. Right? Yeah. But still, I bet it's still hard for some of the high Ds in the audience to hear. It's not hard for us to say because we've learned it the hard way, right? But the fact is the whole relationship thing works as well with your peers as it does with your team. So there's a scene in one of my favorite movies of all time, Wall Street. And I think sometime next year, I don't know, they're going to come out with Wall Street 2 with Gordon Gekko again. It's instructive for many of the high Ds who are listening. Charlie Sheen, the guy who plays Bud Fox, the young guy who gets corrupted by Gordon Gekko, he's been friends for a long time with one of his fellow brokers, a tall, slim guy. But as Bud Fox's meteoric rise begins, he begins to shun his buddy, who he sees as just a hanger-on. When he finally has his comeuppance and he realizes what an ass he's been, he goes over to his buddy and he apologizes. And luckily, his buddy accepts the apology, though frankly, we're left to wonder whether or not his buddy just did it because he was as greedy as Charlie's Bud Fox character was. And, you know, Charlie Sheen in that role at that time was a high D. And high Ds burn people out. Okay? And it's not just our team. Our peers don't care for our single-mindedness because their needs, because we're in a collaborative organization, almost everybody is, their needs are left out. They see us as out for ourselves, right, as a high D. Now, look, we can console ourselves and say the company benefits enormously from my single-minded focus. But that doesn't mean that the perception of high Ds is wrong. Folks, admit it if you're a high D. If there were no rewards, no power gained, no salary raised, no promotion offered, you wouldn't be driving yourself quite as hard. So, even if the company does benefit, most high Ds are guilty as charged, out for themselves.
Yeah, and our peers like us for that, right?
Yeah, our peers don't like us. They intensely don't like us for it. We dismiss their requests. I mean, really, how can we have time or care for their needs when our needs completely and utterly fill up our days and hours, right? We can't, and they know it. But here's the problem, and it's the exact same problem we create with our teams. Over time, unfettered dominance fails. Not in the beginning. You can take a team and give 5,000 men. You take a hill and take 5,000 men to do it. You can burn your team out and achieve great results, okay? But over time, you'll begin to fail. My dad used to tell me, I know people at conferences hear this all the time. You can take more than you give, but only for a little while until they run you out of town. If you're in an organization, there's a built-in assumption of collaboration and collegiality, which, by the way, has nothing to do with college. It means shared responsibility. When you let your high D go unchecked and you don't exhibit collegiality or collaboration, you run roughshod over other people, you essentially destroy all the reasonable goodwill others will offer you. And here's the important thing. It doesn't matter how good your results are. If you run roughshod over your peers, you're going to destroy their goodwill and they're going to make you pay. Now, what high Ds say is, yes, I'm running roughshod over my peers and I'm destroying my goodwill with them, but my results are so good that my bosses want this And so I have goodwill with them. And you know what? You're right for a while. Until you reach that point where your career has to make the jump from manager to executive, and then your bosses are executive, they know that their collaboration at their level requires relationships. They say, you know what, you've been great. Thank you so much, but we can't open the final door for you and give you a shot at the top, the brass ring, because frankly, you didn't learn along the way that you've got to have relationships and results. And, we're happy to milk you for all the results you can give us. And we'll do our best to try to clean up your messes and make sure the people you burn out, we don't lose them, but we put them with another boss and we take care of them. But the fact is, if you can't make that transition from results only to results and relationships, the goodwill you destroy with your peers in the long run is not completely made up for by the goodwill you build up with your bosses. And in fact, there are some bosses who would say, you haven't built up any goodwill with me. I gave you a bonus. That's a stand-in for goodwill. You'll get a bonus and goodwill from me if you achieve those great results and you develop relationships, so we can have 10 people as good as you, so we can have 10 times as much results as what you brought us alone.
All right. So what do we do? I mean, is there anything we can do with our peers and colleagues to develop these relationships that you're talking about?
Yeah, as painful it is for the high Ds to hear, you've got to reach out to your peers and colleagues. You really do. For those colleagues who work for the same boss as you, you've got to do peer one-on-ones. 30 minutes once a week, 15 minutes for them, whatever that might be, and then 15 minutes for your stuff. You'll probably connect to them in some small way. They get to go first, tell you whatever they want to tell you, and then during your 15 minutes, tell them what you need from them and update them on what you've been doing for them. Now, we're going to be doing a cast for high D peer O3s because it's something that's really, really important, in addition to the already released standard peer one-on-one cast. And by the way, if I'm saying O3 and you don't know what I mean one-on-one, okay? But briefly, right, tell them what you've done on stuff they need from you. Ask them for the stuff you need from them. Regarding the stuff they ask you for, because there are some IDs going, why do I want to meet with these people so that I can give them a forum to tell me what they need from me? Right? Why would I do that? Why would I legitimize their request for my time? Look, we know you don't want to take a meeting that creates deliverables not relating to the hills you're taking. But look, for the stuff they ask you for, delegate it to one of your team immediately. Your directs are going to get exposure to a peer manager, and you won't have that much extra to do. Further, look, think carefully about reaching out strategically in the broader organization. Maybe there are 2 or 3 other peer equivalents of yours who maybe don't work for your boss, but who are worth cultivating a relationship with. Ask them to consider it. Now look, be careful. If they can't immediately see the value of meeting with you, they're likely to turn you down. Don't overreach. Don't just say, these are the 10 people that I really ought to have a great relationship with, so therefore I ought to do peer one-on-ones with them. No, you've got to add value to them as well, as painful as it may be for you to admit, as opposed to just you getting something out of them.
Yeah. And look, if you're on a short-term project or initiative, don't think these don't apply. Say it's a 3 to 6 month project. Same thing. Offer peer one-on-ones, even if it's for a period of 3 to 6 months.
Same basic rules. And what you're doing is you're investing enough in the relationship. You're keeping lines of communication open. You're probably going to have to do a little bit more work than you'd like. But in the end, when you have to turn to them and say, you've got to pull me out of a jam, they're going to be willing to do it because you offered some time 2 or 3 years ago.
Right. If you're already an executive and you don't know this stuff, you better learn it pretty darn quickly.
Look, here, you've heard me say this before, folks. If you're a manager, what you call politics at the levels above you, executives call collaboration. If you don't have relationships built by the time you get to the more senior levels of your firm, you won't have time to build them when you're deluged with lots of new hard work, complex work that requires all kinds of collaboration.
Right. Your peers at that level have already learned the lesson a long time ago. And if they know it and you don't know it, you're going to look like an idiot.
Yeah, they're going to be able to work with one another, right? But you're going to wonder why your initiatives never seem to get traction. And it's going to bug you because you know in a relationship neutral world, if it was a pure fact-based world, you know your initiatives are worth more value to the organization, but yours don't seem to get picked up. Why? Because other people don't like you. And you might say to yourself, well, that's not very fair. Well, look up Robert's Rules of Order or look up Hoyle or something. It doesn't apply to the executive suite. Okay? People will support your stuff if you support theirs. And the way you're willing to help them support, if you're willing to support them, they're willing to support you. You have to develop some relationships with people Otherwise, you'll be left behind. And look, if you get up there and you don't have relationships because you've been a high D and you burn people out, but you've achieved outside results, and after 2 years, you're still not getting your initiative started, and it's been fairly quiet in terms of home runs for you, you're going to get an average review, which essentially is a kiss of death as an executive, and you're going to be encouraged to leave. The first time you get encouraged to leave, you won't recognize it. The second time, you will. And really, frankly, they won't ever tell you to leave, but you're going to start wanting to because you're not going to feel like you're doing as good as you used to do. And it will be entirely your fault. It's not because senior people are dumb. It's because you haven't learned the lesson yet that it's not all results. It takes a balance between results and relationships.
Do you think the pure one-on-ones is sufficient? I mean, I can meet with somebody every week, 15 minutes for them, 15 minutes for me, work on the relationship. And I've seen it done and then completely blown away in a meeting when somebody has an idea and the high D says, well, that's stupid. One little sentence, right? and it may be stupid, right? It may, in fact, be really stupid. The high D opens his mouth and blows away all that good work. I guess the point here is mind your tongue, right? Yeah.
Right.
Truth, right? Speaking truth to power and relationships don't always mix.
Yeah. You may be right, but that doesn't mean it's going to be effective. You and I talk about that all the time, the exchanging effectiveness for correctness. Look, if you're high D and you're still listening, shut the hell up. Yeah, shut the hell up, right? I mean, look, now you S's and C's and I's are like, oh my God, I can't believe he said that. The high D's don't mind. Trust us, right? Stop telling other people how stupid they are, even when there's ample evidence. If they don't know they're stupid, you telling them stupid will do nothing but irritate and embarrass them, and won't teach them that they're stupid. All it is you showing naked power that you can get away with it. It doesn't help. It's embarrassing. If people feel like they just watched somebody throw up in a room when you say, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, right? They might know that you're right, and they might literally, if I said that to somebody in a meeting, and Mike heard it, and Mike was enlightened enough to know that relationships are important, Mike would turn to one of his peers and sort of shake his head gently. And he's not shaking his head at the stupid person that I just labeled inappropriately. He's shaking his head at me. And what he's saying is, Mark just doesn't get it. That the fact that somebody's stupid doesn't give you license to say so out loud. There's a difference between thinking and saying and doing, right? Look, there are going to be a lot of people who aren't as smart, at least according to you, as you are. Certainly below you, they're not going to be as smart. You define smarts as the ability to get things done. And so they can't get as much done as you because they're a level below you. And they're going to be around you. And yeah, they're going to even be above you. But high Ds have got to learn the distinction between thinking, saying, and doing, right? Think all you want about the weaknesses of others, but don't say it. In your language, for now, think of others less accomplished than you as useful idiots. Pardon me for saying that, I's, S's, and C's. Just don't tell them that's how you see them.
Oh, well, what about the high Ds that are thinking, I don't do that. I don't humiliate people routinely. That's not me.
Yeah, maybe not every day, right? But you do it far more than you realize. When you're thinking of saying what you feel, don't. Hold your tongue, because the brief sense of power you feel when you do it isn't what lasts. What lasts is the pain and suffering of your direct or your peer or the person serving you, or their anger, perhaps not spoken to you, but held on to until you need them. And frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if one of my favorite quotes, sort of pithy quotes or aphorisms, was uttered by someone who had just been spoken directly, right? That's what the high D would say. I was just direct with him. And the quote is, revenge is a dish best served cold. They're thinking to themselves, just wait, you SOB, just wait. When you need me, I'm going to act as if I'm supporting you, but then I'm going to bail. And you're going to be left holding the bag after you've committed to something, and you think you can get away with it. And I'll have my revenge on you. And look, we'd be thrilled if every high D learned to bite his or her tongue, chew on their cheek, and stop being a verbal jerk, because truth and relationships don't mix, and you got to mind your tongue. But that'd be great if everybody listened to this said, wow, I need to get this. And trust me, Mike and I have both been there. We've lived this life. We know what we're recommending to you. And this is a better way. keeping quiet and building relationships, right? We're also at the same time going to hope that someday, every one of you high Ds, you have a moment where your soul wells up inside of you and your soul shouts at you something along the lines of, all of us on the planet are equal. All of us are connected. All of us have value. Kindness, grace, and gentleness, which you don't use very often, have lost their luster to you in the modern world, but they are truly beautiful and they work. They're effective. Help somebody who needs it rather than ridiculing their weakness. Practice some charity as a high D. Other people don't have your gifts. You're supposed to share your gifts with them. Being nice isn't a weakness. It's actually a sign of strength. The people who have been most successful in the world, what they start doing is charity, helping other people with their gifts. And that's what we recommend you do. And then we could also say it in high D language, which is, if you don't have anything nice to say, no matter how true it is, don't say anything at all.
Yeah. A high D would say, shut up, but say nothing at all would be a polite way to say it.
Yeah. So look, wrapping up, right? So hopefully we shared, don't assume your boss is a high D, right? Be careful about that, folks, right? Don't kill the goose to get to its golden eggs. Get to know your team, high Ds. Spend time in your weekly one-on-ones. Results don't always trump people. Invest in your relationships with others, right? Have peer one-on-ones. That'll help. And then mind your tongue. Be quiet even when you mean it. Look, if you're a high D boss, you've got to take the edge off of your focus on results. Your constant focus on short-term goals, on moving forward, on taking the next hill, and on your next project, and how important it is, and how it's going to be bigger and better, and you're going to get the rewards and so on. Those things all come at the expense of your team if you don't have a good relationship with them. You have embodied the idea that nothing is impossible for the one who doesn't have to do it him or herself. But you need your team to be willing and able to help you on your next big plan. Not just their 80%, but 100% of what they do. Think about it. If everybody on your team is giving you 80%, that's like having 5 people to do the work of 4. Why not have all 5? Your team won't be able to give you their best if you don't spend some time with them. It's human nature. You may not like it, but the fact is it's true. Okay? And if you want to be an executive, you're going to have to learn to work with other people. The sales VP can't design and make the product she wants to sell. She has to rely on her fellow executives and their organizations for that. Learn the skill and wisdom now of having good relationships with your peers. And then lastly, as we've alluded to and said, stop being right all the time. Be willing to soften the truth to protect a relationship. You'll need them in a pinch, those relationships. And there's truth to the old adage, smile at people on your way up because you're going to see them on your way back down.
Very true. Cool. Thanks, my friend. That was great.
My pleasure.
Enjoyed it.
See you, partner.
We'll see you.